But and another thing that I find so often with vegans is they're not even familiar with nature. I grew up in nature. I was running around the woods for the last 40-some years.
Well, how do you want to define nature?
And I see it. And I remember as a little kid, I didn't like the fact that species ate other species. It just, like, I didn't want the cool little pickerel frog to get eaten by the...
Well, it's just something that goes on in society. This is such a philosophically unnuanced way of looking at the world. Hey, it goes on in nature, man. Like, just see everything around us. Everything in nature is constantly changing. Things that were natural, 1,000, a million years ago are not natural now. Not just with humans, but with other species. Other species evolve. Other species have different proclivities. To simply say that, look, this is the way that we're in now, we're stuck in it, therefore we must maintain this, and we don't have to do anything to change it. That's to fall into this mindset of things are as they are, therefore we should never do anything to change them. Slavery was considered natural. Infanticide was considered natural. There are many things that we see around us that are completely natural. Ethics, morality, in the way in which you're using nature has nothing to do with this, what we see around us, nature. It has to do with this theory. This is by John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, this idea that morality is something that is not contingent on different environments and different times. It is something that is maintained in the very nature of existence. It's not contingent on the circumstances of one's birth. Morality is not different to you based off of your race. It's not different based off of what environment you're born in, whether you live in China or whether you live in Egypt. There are axiomatic principles that are inherent within human ethics, human and non-human ethics. This idea is not based off of what we see around us. If all we need to do is just change our environment, we're in an environment where we need to survive, therefore it becomes acceptable to kill human beings, it becomes acceptable to rape people, and say, well, this is what we're seeing around us, therefore it's acceptable. That has nothing to do with morality. That has to do with this what we call just reality. But that's very different. If you're talking about anarchism, so no rules, if you're talking about the philosophy of any moral philosophy, and you're simply defining it based off of what we see around us, hey, this is what we see around us, therefore it's moral. Hey, the state is able to kill people, rape them, extort them, therefore it's moral. Then, as far as I'm concerned, you should not be having the conversation in regards to anarchism, in regards to moral philosophy, and you should be simply dealing in the realms of utilitarian ethics in regards to how to best deal with how to create certain outcomes. I mean, this is the realm of Marxism. I mean, you find that a lot of socialists, I would say most of them, don't believe in this concept of right and wrong. They believe in moral relativism. They believe in trying to achieve goals. But the distinction I would like to think is when you're dealing with anarchists, when you're dealing with voluntarists, libertarians, people that have this idea that there are actual individual rights, there is this objective truth to things, they should never be making arguments along these lines that, hey, it's what we see around us. They should 100% subscribe to the idea that there are axiomatic truths. And from these truths, we can at least try to uncover what is right, what is acceptable. But to be making these arguments, this shows a poor lack of understanding of moral philosophy. If you're using something like the concept of nature as your basis for morality, nature in the sense of what we see around us.
Water snake. It's like, but he's so cool. I didn't want the little baby bunny to get swooped up by a red-tailed hawk. Oh, that's horrible. Part of me wanted to defend the innocent, and the other part of me understood, well, that's sort of like, that's what nature is. Time out. Do not do the straw man at me of, oh, you think just because red-tailed hawks do it, we should do it? No. Pay attention to what I'm actually saying, not what you wish I was saying, so you can argue against it.
I am paying attention to what you're saying. And
nature does this. And the choices of a snake or a red-tailed hawk, you can't just give them a salad. It doesn't really work. The choices are lots of prey species, individual animals, are going to die, or the predator species is going to die. Those are the options in nature. One of them's going to happen. And I didn't like that when I was growing up. And when I was growing up in the woods, I realized that suffering is the natural course of things.
Yes, but we should still try to reduce suffering. And whereas I understand that you're saying that, yes, there's a distinction between human beings, that these animals, they don't have any choices, and maybe you're implying they don't have the same level of moral agency, but we do have more choices. We do have moral agency. Therefore, to make the argument that it's some, I mean, if you're going at this and saying that it's somehow acceptable for animals to do this, therefore, but it's not acceptable for us to treat each other like this, it's not a consistent argument. I mean, the reality of the situation is that human beings are animals, for starters, and human beings, if we're going to take on this attitude of just doing what we do because it's part of our nature, then we might as well not have any ethics whatsoever. But clearly the fact that we have choices, clearly the fact that we have moral agency, means that we should treat ourselves to a higher standard than what we see around us. I mean, it's not to say that what goes on in the animal kingdom is acceptable just because it happens. There are many situations that just because a child steals something and beats up a little kid doesn't make it acceptable. It's understandable. Doesn't have the same level of awareness. However, you should still try to guide it, to try to get it to evolve, to change its ways. These animals, like ourselves, they're going through their own evolution. Maybe in time, they won't have the same attitudes that they have. It's quite possible that certain species started off with proclivities for doing things that were not as ethical or as beneficial for them, but have changed, evolved over time, just like human beings. Just like other species go through evolution, human beings also go through their evolution. But to maintain that, well, it's what we see in nature, therefore it's okay, is not a good argument. It's actually a really bad one.
Time out, another straw man. Don't throw at me, you think it's okay just because it's natural? No, I believe nothing of the sort. It's natural to want to punch somebody in the face if he annoys you, and yet you shouldn't. If somebody has something you want, it's natural to want to punch them and steal their stuff and run away, and yet you shouldn't. Natural has nothing to do with whether it's moral.
Then what are you saying? What are you saying then? What are you saying if natural has nothing to do with it? Because you're contradicting yourself. You're making these arguments, hey, this is what happens in nature. You know, I hate this stuff, but I'm not saying it's okay because it's natural. Then what are you saying? Because I think you're alluding to something, but you're trying not to say it because you realize that it's not a good argument.
Or not. I am saying that if you go out in the wild, the way animals die in the wild is way worse than being killed by a hunter. Way worse.
Not an argument, though. Okay, I'll let you finish, but if you're saying it's way worse, therefore it's more acceptable for us to kill them, that's not a voluntarist argument. You know, it's like me saying, hell, this person's going to die anyway, you know, really agonizing ways, so let me just shoot them in the head. Not an argument, Larken, and I know that you know this.
Example of a white-tailed deer all the time here in woods of eastern Pennsylvania. How do you think they die in nature? If you watch too many Disney movies and think, oh, nature is...
You see, this would be perfectly acceptable for someone to make as an argument if they were not people that subscribe to the philosophy of anarchic thinking, so anarchists or voluntarists. But for someone like Larken to be making these kind of arguments, it's really disconcerting to me because their appeal to, oh, well, you know, the other alternative is worse kind of arguments. It doesn't make it acceptable to do something to someone if it's a violation because it's better than the alternative. Hey, someone's most likely going to be shot to death. Shot. So I'm going to... Oh, better example, someone is likely going to die of cancer. That's going to be extremely painful. So, you know, I'll just shoot them in the head and eat them. And before you lose your mind, if you're still watching me, this is granted, this has been a very long video, but you have to understand that it's not an argument from a voluntary standpoint. If it is wrong to do something, it is simply wrong to do it. You don't make the argument that you're lessening the pain, unless, of course, it's voluntary. Unless, of course, you can make the argument this animal wants you to kill it. You don't have the right to take its life. You don't have the right to take its life because you think the alternative is worse.
All this lovely, peaceful harmony. No, it's not. It's violent and nasty and heartless, and most things suffer horribly on their way to dying.
What does this sound like? Life is brutal and people die people suffer the wars, and that's just reality, man. I mean, this is what happens in government. Yeah, people are brutal, horrible people. Doesn't that sound like something a statist would say? Yeah, life is horrible. People get hurt. That's just reality. Yeah, the government has a coercive, violent monopoly on you, but so what? That's just reality. That's just what happens. What does that sound like? Sounds like something that a statist would say. Does it not?
Maybe it gets ripped apart by coyotes, but more often than not, and I know because I've seen it because I lived in the woods, a deer will get old and sick, and it'll starve to death because it can't stand up, or it'll freeze to death because the winters get too cold and it can't get around to get food, or it'll get some horrible sickness and it'll be lying around and it'll have maggots in it while it's still alive, and vultures standing around waiting to eat the frickin' thing, because nature doesn't give a crap. The only thing that gives a crap is people. Which is good.
Whoa. Do we see the insane, the logical... Wait. Nature doesn't give a crap, but people do. People are not a part of nature. I mean, I'm using your terminology here. So it's like, we got nature, and then we got people. People are not a part of nature. People are not a part of what's going on around us. So, whereas nature itself does not give a shit about this stuff, these animals and what we see around us, the environment, us as human beings, we're external from nature, and we give a shit about this shit. We give a shit about this shit. But what I'm trying to say here is obviously human beings are a part of the world that we see around us. So nature, in the terms that Larken is using this thing. I mean, maybe nature does actually give a shit. I mean, if nature is not only a term that we use for society from a larger concept, but is also in reference to the individual things that make it up. So as human beings, the animals around us, maybe they do care as well. Maybe not just human beings. I mean, I care. I know that you care. But also the animals care as well. The animals care about what happens to them if their environment is polluted, if their young are taken away from them. They care as well. Remove the things that make up nature from nature and say, well, nature doesn't care, but us that are part of nature does care. I think is somewhat of a false distinction to create. I mean, the reality is that we are individuals, but we are also part of the world that we see around us. And if we're talking about nature, Nita, in reference to the principle, the principal nature of the universe, then it's incumbent upon us to bring ourselves to higher conduct, be constantly evolving, to bring about more beneficence in the society, as opposed to saying, well, nature is fixed. This is how things are. Therefore, we must continue to live as things are, to do things as things are. Therefore, a few hundred years ago, slavery, it's nature. Us human beings care, but nature doesn't care. So let's just continue to have slavery. Go back even further, infanticide. All the horrible things that our ancient ancestors would do, the genocide. Well, I care personally. You're a caring person, but nature does not care. So let's just continue raping, killing, doing all the horrible stuff that we do. It's part of nature.
Like that. And most of the hunters I know a number of hunters, they don't want the animal to suffer. So if you're saying that if you eat meat, you're causing suffering, you don't understand what's going on. A hunter reduces suffering. Now, another straw man, don't throw...
The government reduces suffering. Alternatively, the world would be far more violent. It would be wars going on 24/7 if we did not have government. Government reduces the suffering by using coercion, by minimizing the violence in the world. The government reduces all the suffering, and therefore it's necessary. I mean, think of what would happen if we didn't have government. There would be anarchy. There would be disorderly conduct. There would be wars going on all around the world. There would be nuclear destructions. Do you guys know what happens in anarchy? There'd just be wars 24/7. But the government reduces suffering.
Well, so you think it's okay to kill your neighbor as long as you don't make him suffer? Nope, said nothing of the sort, believe nothing of the sort.
Let's be real over here. You just said that hunters reduce suffering. Oh, well, you're trying to go back and forth. It's like you're trying to imply something. You actually said that. Are you trying to tell us that by you saying that hunters reduce suffering, you didn't actually mean it was okay for them to do that? I mean, fair enough. I'm going to give you a benefit of the doubt. Maybe you actually think that. But why mention it? Why mention it? Why say that hunters are only reducing suffering if you don't actually buy into this idea that it's okay for hunters to do what they do? Now, granted, maybe in response to what a lot of vegans are saying, that ultimately they're trying to reduce suffering. Well, I don't come at it from that perspective. This is not about reducing suffering per se. This is about not doing something because it's definitively right or wrong. The same approach that you would use when you're talking about government and it violating your individual rights is the same approach that I apply when it comes to human and non-human animals.
About suffering, talk about suffering. Don't get it wrong. Don't lie about what you believe. If you're going to talk about, well, it shouldn't be killed, then talk about that. Be honest about what you're saying. Hunting does not increase suffering. There is pretty much no way that most things will die.
Well, that's not true. You're saying that in a general sense. I mean, that might be the case, but you don't know that. You're making it's a pseudo-profundity in that you think that you know how this is going to affect other animals, affect their network. For all you know, by you going into their species with your smelliness and shocking them, and then taking the lives of the young ones, the animals may be thinking, "What the fuck is going on? This weird hunter came into my environment and just shot one of my friends, and now I'm incredibly traumatized. I don't know." But, and look, in fairness, in reality, yeah, I generally agree that it is probably reducing suffering, at least in the immediacy of things. But look, it's not an argument. And two, you don't know that definitively speaking. It may actually be creating more harm. There might be many times where you shoot the animal and you haven't gotten a clear shot. And therefore, that animal may have to be in pain for an extended period of time before you finally hunt it down. There are many situations where hunting may not be the easier way to go. But you know what? I'm not going to proclaim that as a definitive. The thing is, as soon as you're making judgments about what's going to happen, what's likely to happen, you're moving into the realm of utilitarianism. The fact of the matter is, I stand by this argument that you shouldn't be doing it anyway. If you want to play this game of like what's likely going to bring about less or more suffering, you're moving into the realm of what causes government. This is the same argument that utilitarians use. Therefore, I should not have to make this argument to someone like you, Larken.
Most large vertebrates will die in nature that is less suffering than getting killed by a human hunter. There just isn't. And if you don't believe me, go live in nature for a while and see how friggin' ruthless it is. And see how slowly and painfully so many things die. It's freaking horrible. And that's how nature is. I don't like it. I don't want to contribute to that amount of suffering. But to pretend that eating meat causes suffering is just stupid and dishonest. No, it freaking doesn't. You can say, again, buying meat...
People are saying this as a generalization. It's like you say, there are certain phrases that you say that you don't take literally. For instance, you joining the military, like a lot of people say that people who join the military are dickheads, they're violent. Now, we understand that joining the military in of itself does not make you a violent person. However, it is the act of actually going to other countries and shooting people and killing them that makes you violent. These are general terms that people use. And granted, you're right. If you take it literally, it's stupid. It's like saying that, police officers are immoral. Not technically speaking. It's people that join immoral establishments and violate the natural rights of others that are violent. And often that happens with police officers. However, the act of simply being a police officer, if we're going to be logically consistent here and actually definitive, doesn't make you violent. It's the actions. And whereas you're right, people that say, oh, meat causes suffering, I mean, technically speaking, it does not actually mean that. However, the idea of paying people to consume meat, supporting these industries, subjectively, yes, it does cause suffering. So I understand what he's doing. This is the route that I take when I'm being more nuanced about what people say. But if we're looking at the meta rationale of what people are saying or implying when they say these things, I think it's understandable that when people are saying meat is murder, it's not something to be taken literally. And I often don't. I hate people that say that kind of shit because it's without reason that's not literally accurate. But generally speaking, I understand what they mean. And it has to do with this understanding of what people actually mean. Words have no meaning. Words have no purpose unless, of course, there is a uniformity of understanding, just like concepts. If I use the word anarchism and you have a completely different idea of what anarchism is than what I have, then it's pointless. But if there is a consistency in the understanding, that's all that matters. And I want people to be very clear when we're talking about this. When I am speaking about the concept of nature, I'm speaking about a principle. I'm not speaking about this idea of what we see around us. I realize that ostensibly most people don't look at it like that. But once again, that's why I think it's important to define things clearly. When I'm speaking about the concept of anarchism, I'm not speaking about this social contract where we only treat human beings ethically. I'm talking about the idea of not having rulers, period, in relation to sentient beings, human and non-human animals. And the list goes on. I think it's important for us to have an understanding of what these terms actually mean. And to understand that when people are making references to certain things like, oh, meat is murder, and meat causes suffering, it's not necessarily be taken literally. Granted, you can call people up on the stupidity of that, literal context, but their language is not just about literal meaning. It's about nuanced meaning as well. Many of the things that we say are euphemisms, are not to be taken directly. They're lighthearted. As long as you understand what people are trying to convey, that's the point. That's all that's necessary.
From that industry that treats their animals like that contributes to suffering. True. Good. I don't like that. Feel free to try to talk people out of that. That's excellent. Go right ahead. Once upon a time, we used to go to a farm that had their not free range, but they're out in the field and they're wandering around. You can go and see how they treat their animals, and they do dairy products and meat, and they associate it with the butcher and stuff. And so you can see how they're treated. And we used to get our meat there. And those cows had an easier life than any other wild animal. They get shelter, they get free medical care and stuff because you don't want your cows to be sick. So
hey, look at how people live their lives in government. I mean, in a governmental system. I mean, they get to watch TV, they get to go to the Super Bowl, play football. They have all these different choices. I mean, it's perfectly fine. I mean, granted, they're at the end of the day, if they step out of line, they'll end up in jail, or if they don't pay their taxes, they'll be harmed. But I mean, the alternative, it's this system is just so much better. I mean, think about it's perfect. I mean, who cares? I mean, I'm going to chop up these animals, and I'm going to kill them the other day. But the alternative to living out in the wilderness and suffering. I mean, come on. You know what, Larken? I agree with you, man. It's better. It's better just to treat them like this, to encage them and then kill them at the end of the day, provided we're treating them well. And it's better to have. It is. Let's be honest. Let's be honest here. It is better to have government. I mean, the alternative is so much worse. I mean, most of us, we live a natural life where we get to eat what we want. We get to watch what we want. We get to fuck more or less who we want. And, I mean, who cares if we have a few restrictions? I mean, it's fine. The alternative, like having nuclear war and living in this anarchy, God, I don't know if I want that. So you know what? I tend to see what Larken's saying here.
It's not about suffering. They suffer less. Or the example of the cats I own that are horribly caged against their will because we keep them indoors. And we don't let them out because we're enslaving them. Although
I agree with that. That's a stupid argument. Vegans, any of you that want to make those kind of arguments, get the fuck out of here. That stuff is ridiculous. I'm not even going to dignify that shit with a response. You have a cat, you're enslaving your animal. That argument does not require a response, and I'm 100% with Larken on this one. It's kind of annoying the fact that he has to bring it up, but he does bring it up because the truth is, there are some stupid arguments out there. You're enslaving your animal by having them as a pet. A voluntary relationship with an animal that actually wants to be around you. Anyone that in reference to dogs and cats, anyone that has any relationship with them realizes that they absolutely love you to death. That's why we love them. I mean, I prefer dogs over human beings. That's just my own. I know it sounds horrible, but in the fact that they love you so much, they don't want to harm you. And if I presume many other human beings don't want to treat their animals poorly. They treat them like family members. The idea that you're somehow forcing them, you're somehow imposing your will on them if they don't want to be in that situation is ridiculous. If these animals did not want to be in this situation, then absolutely you should not enslave them. You should not force them to do that. But the reality is, by and large, the relationships that human beings have with animals, dogs and cats, are voluntary. And granted, there's certain practices that I'm not in line with, if it's not in line with what that animal wants. And yes, animals that can consent, they have nonverbal cues the same way that I can tell if someone is interested in engaging with me. I can tell if an animal wants to engage in me, wants to cohabitate with me. So I'm completely in agreement with Larken in regards to this issue of pet ownership that some vegans seem to abhor.
Sit around and enslave us and get free room and board and medical care. And I just spent $500 on one that had a urinary tract problem. They have an easier life than anything in the wild. Now, another straw man. Don't say...
Distinction there as we're talking about voluntary. This is what people do a lot of the times. They make rational arguments that are good, and then they make horrible arguments, and people can't distinguish. No one's going to be completely consistent about everything, unless, of course, you're me, man. No, but it's so important to exercise sound judgment, not to just buy into things because it's been said by someone that you respect. I have watched many of Larken's videos. I think it watched up till maybe a few months back, maybe several months ago. Watched every video on his channel. He's brilliant. But once again, like many of us have blinders, and when he talks about non-human animals, his anarchic thinking, completely falls apart. And that's just me being as objective as I can. Like these arguments, I'm definitive that Larken realizes that many of his arguments are not arguments. Now, granted, he is making reference to what he believes is vegan dishonesty, but once again, pseudo-profundity. You don't know what vegans think. And you're speaking, generally speaking, you may be right in many of them. I agree with you in that sense. A lot of them make or say things that are not consistent or not actually what they believe. But nonetheless, you don't know if that's the case. Some of them are actually being honest in what they think.
Say that I'm claiming that, well, so if you can enslave a person as long as you make them not suffer? Nope, didn't say that. And you can kill a person as long as they suffer? Nope, didn't say that. Don't argue.
But you're implying it. The idea of mentioning something like that and saying, hey, well, look, what's the alternative? What's the alternative? And saying, hey, it's not what I'm saying. Larken, now I would say you were being dishonest in that you were implying something and then trying to pretend that that's not something that you were implying. Of course, you would not have said that if, I mean, essentially, what are you saying? Unless you're using that as a way of contrasting or saying that the arguments vegans are making that, look, it's about reducing suffering, that's not true, because obviously it would be reducing suffering if we treated them the way that we did. Fair enough, I would give you that. But I truly believe there is a part of you that is making these arguments to show that, hey, it's acceptable. It's a way of you advocating for this without actually advocating for it, which I personally think. Now, I'm not saying that you're disingenuous. I use a bit of your own approach here, but hey, you know what? I'm just saying that, but I don't actually think that. It's not that I'm saying that. I'm just talking about it.
Argue against things I didn't say. And the reason I keep bringing up these straw men is every single one is something I've seen a dozen different vegans throw at me because they don't want to address what I actually said because it's so obviously undeniable.
So what are you actually saying? You're saying that a lot of vegans proclaim that it's about reducing suffering. And I would agree that it should not be about that. We're in agreement there, 100%. But the fact of the matter is that many vegans do actually believe that, and you're wrong about that. Some actually do. And more importantly, your definitions are your own personal definitions. I don't think they're consistent definitions. They're cherry-picked definitions in regards to how you define anarchism. And more to the point, it's still a horrible attitude if you want to perpetuate this attitude that it's somehow acceptable for us to respect human beings. The human life is sacred. However, we don't extend that same respect towards non-human animals. And I think that's the greater conversation that you may not be truly addressing, but I think that's what we're trying to address when a lot of the vegans critique a lot of the things that you imply but not actually say.
No, eating a steak doesn't cause anything to suffer. It's dead. How the animal is treated ahead of time and whether you funded that can contribute to suffering.
True.
Talk about that. Be actually honest.
Yeah.
So the notion that all species are equal is a total lie, and the notion that anybody believes that is a total lie. Here's the thing. The reason vegans do that, some vegans, is because there's a gray area and they don't want there to be a gray area. They want it to be a solid principle that they can say, this is what you must believe and how you must behave to be moral, when that doesn't even apply to them?
Not necessarily. It's called the golden rule. Treat others as you would like to be treated. I would not do to an animal anything that I would not want done to myself. And if I was to put myself in the same situation, if I was an animal that did not have the capacity for speech, that did not have the same awareness, intelligence, how would I want to be treated? How would I feel? Would I have a problem with people taking care of me, guiding me? Sure, would I? Yeah, I'd be in line with that. Would I have a problem being milked, staying on property? No, I would not have an issue with that. Would I have an issue with someone chopping me up and separating me from my mother? I would have an issue with that. Put yourself in the same situation. That is the line for me. That's the measurement, the golden rule. Ask yourself whether or not you would want that done to you. This all comes down to putting the golden rule. This is the fundamental theme behind anarchism. What you would want done to you. So whether we're dealing with human beings or non-human animals, put yourself, that's the metric. And granted, it becomes a little subjective, but clearly you don't want to be raped. Clearly you don't want to be death stabbed. Clearly you don't want to be violated like that. That is the line. That is the metric. And to play this game of, oh, there's no definitive line, not really the case. I mean, granted, every individual is different, but we're all united in our want to not be harmed. We all want different things, but you can't speak about what people want definitively, but you can universally, generally speak about what people don't want. All life abhors pain and suffering. That's why the whole concept of ahimsa is about non-violence, about not causing harm. But if you want to advocate that, hey, you know what, look, there is no line, so I can pretty much do what I want, that's what I'm not on board with.
Like if they say, I respect all species equally. Bullshit. No, you freaking don't. And no, you don't value all life the same and every living organism. You draw lines too. You may draw them in different places. The thing is, it is a gray area. And even if you're a principled anarchist or voluntarist, there are lots of gray areas you can think up of, all right, how much of a threat does something have to count as a threat before forcible defense is justified? Or in property.
That's true. I think about this stuff a lot. It has to be immediate. This is what a lot of conservatives do. Like, well, it's a threat to national security. I see that as being a threat. No, it has to be immediate. It has to be actually an action or a stated action. If someone puts a gun in your face and tells you that they're going to shoot you unless you give them money, that is an immediate, objectively definable threat, as opposed to someone that says, hey, it's a threat, the fact that you're arming yourself, you're getting all these guns, that's a threat as well. No, one is objective, one's not.
How much can you homestead? How much can you just say is yours and have the right to forcibly keep other people off? Like,
touche.
Is it a foot? Is it 1,000
there
miles?
There is a level of subjectivity
there. There are lots of places where there's actually gray area.
But then there are lots of places that are not gray areas, and people like to advocate that they're gray areas just so that they can continue doing what they're doing, which is obviously not in line with, what I would call anarchism, or morality, for that matter. Voluntarism, the idea of nonviolence.
And because there isn't a simple conceptual way to say, right here is the line. You can debate about where it should be and how to generally define the line, but it's a gray area, and I can prove that you know it's a gray area. You can be the most militant vegan around, and you know damn well there's a gray area, because if you're faced with either running over a dog or an ant, you're going to run the ant over, and you should.
That's a false comparison. It has nothing to do with veganism. That's like choosing which violence, choosing what you're going to avoid doing. I mean, as opposed to actually initiating violence. That's a horrible comparison. If I had to definitively choose between one evil or another, or doing something that I shouldn't do or not, I mean, provided there's a choice to not do either, and that's the choice that you should take. But given two situations there, yeah, that's very different to what I would advocate for in regards to non-violence, in that you should never be initiating violence. To do something accidentally, to be in a situation where you actually don't have any choice, not this arbitrary made-up idea of not having a choice that a lot of socialists advocate for, that, well, I don't have a choice, unless, of course, I'll die unless, of course, I... Anyway, you understand what I'm saying. The point is, there's a clear distinction between choosing whether or not you're going to avoid what violence, what kind of harm you're going to do if there's not a choice, as opposed to actually going out and initiating violence.
Or, more extreme, if you actually valued every living thing, every animal equally, and thought everyone owns itself just as much as I do, then you would feel justified killing me to stop me from swatting a mosquito. Either you would and you're batshit loony, or you wouldn't because you draw lines too about how much you care about things. And the more intelligent and the more aware they are, the more they seem important to you and the more you don't want them to suffer. And that's true of me.
That's
and
true
it's
of
true
me.
of almost
I agree
everybody.
with that. But
the two extremes,
that's
which are
true
both...
in almost everybody. But once again, I don't make the judgment in saying that that everyone views things the way that I do, because the reality is, as crazy as it sounds, there are people that actually do have that mentality. And whereas they would not be willing to cause violence on you to avoid you swatting a fly, they still consider what you're doing as being immoral.
Stupid. One is, it's okay to murder a human, it's okay to kill a human being to stop him from swatting a mosquito, which you would have to believe, or to stop him from washing his hands for that matter. You're killing bacteria. That's one extreme, which is obviously stupid and bogus. The other extreme is when people say anything that isn't human beings, and there are a number of anarchists who argue this, anything that isn't human beings, they're just property, nothing else. It doesn't matter what you do to them. So if your neighbor wants to torture kittens to death as his hobby, that's perfectly fine. No, it freaking isn't. And there is some point at which I would forcibly intervene. Like if somebody's out, hunting down gorillas, I would actually feel justified in trying to stop them. Because gorillas, while I don't put them on the same level as people, they're pretty damn high up with their intelligence and awareness, and it would creep me out if somebody, let's go have fun shooting gorillas. No, screw you. I'm going to try to get in your way and I'm going to stop you. Because I don't just think, well, it's just the same as furniture or any other property. I don't want to see that suffering. They're aware enough that I want to reduce their suffering. And there's a gray area between that and swatting a mosquito. And there are 80 bazillion species in between. And we can debate about where to draw the lines and how to treat different animals. And we should, and that's perfectly useful. Admit that there is a gray area. Stop pretending that you have some principled thing that meat eaters don't, because you freaking don't. You just draw the lines in different places. And sometimes you don't draw the lines in different, of course I'm going to kill ants that are in my house. Or of course I'm going to swat a mosquito. And then some people say, no, I won't, I'll sort of brush him away. Wherever you draw the lines, admit that you're drawing lines. Don't pretend, well, this is a principled thing. You have to respect every form of life, which again, if you want to be principled, why are you stopping at plants or protozoa or bacteria or wherever you're drawing the line?
Well, the line is sentience, and yes, there is a gray line, but it's called the golden rule. It's ask yourself what you would do if you were in their situation. And yes, even in libertarianism, which is the most subjective philosophy that I've come across, there are elements within that are subjective. But the argument I'd make is that there are certain ideas that are definitely more logically consistent than others. And I would advocate that whereas we should be constantly trying to evolve our thinking, our behavior, our conduct, to being more logically consistent, more ethical. The idea of saying that we're not going to because everything is vague and everything is subjective, which I find a lot of statists do, is wrong. If there is a more consistent way of doing things, a more ethical way of doing things, we should be aligning our conduct to that. This is not a fixed philosophy in that there is, granted the laws of nature, whether it's laws of physics, the laws of ethics, I do believe that they're definitive, but as human beings, we are trying to understand what they are, and we're evolving in our understanding. And if we understand that, for instance, just like 100 or so years ago, people thought it was completely acceptable to treat people as slaves, people of different races as slaves, but that was unethical, and that was a less ethical, less morally consistent way of behaving in line with this philosophy that I believe we share. If in the future we realize that is the case with certain animals, with certain sentient beings, then of course we should apply that. And this is ultimately what this is about. It's not to deny the subjectivity within this area. It is to understand that we should be trying to align ourselves with a philosophy that is as objective as possible and as moral as possible. And I would once again advocate that where we draw the line is different, but the line that I have is more logically consistent than the line that you have. If you're advocating that it is acceptable to kill and eat these beings because they are essentially different to you.
Plants are living things too. You're taking their life.
Well, that's just silly. There's a distinction. Plants aren't sentient beings. They don't have a central nervous system. They may be able to experience some kind of awareness as such. But there's a distinction. There's a criteria that we have for actual human or sentient life, and plants clearly do not meet that criteria. I've discussed this in many videos. I think it's a stupid argument. It's not worth going into. So I'm gonna do Larken the honor of not even going into that argument.
Also get into the fact that what you eat, even if it's plant, whoever grew that slaughtered countless living organisms to keep them from eating it.
Consequentialist argument. And look, the fact of the matter is that if you want to look at things consequentially, you're actually creating more harm by eating animals. I mean, the fact that if you're trying to create a society that is more sustainable, you have a look at all of the plant food that you have to feed these animals in order to consume them. It's obviously wasteful, but this is the people that advocate that you care about plant life and plants are sentient. You're obviously doing more harm by farming these animals. It requires far more plant life in order to feed these animals so that you can eat them. But of course, I don't make the consequentialist argument.
Or even just, well, we're going to till up the ground to grow some stuff. You know how many things you just killed tilling up the ground? Or just walking out in the field to harvest something? You can't exist without killing things. And people say, well, I know that's necessary, but I don't want to cause unnecessary suffering. Good, start with that. That's actually, it's a little vague, because unnecessary for what? But at least start with something honest, that I want to reduce suffering, especially of animals that are more aware and more intelligent. Good, me too. And guess what? That's true of most meat eaters, and it's true of most hunters. And it's why when a lot of people who eat meat see the videos of the horrible conditions that factory farming is, a lot of people go, ew, I don't like that. Good. That's a good sign. It's a good sign they don't like seeing other species suffer, just like they don't like seeing other people suffer. That's outstanding. But admit that it's a gray area, and admit that you're drawing the lines, and don't just pretend, this is the principal thing, I just apply voluntarism to all species. No, you freaking don't. I just think all animal species have equal rights. No, you freaking don't.
Yeah, you do if you apply that to sentient beings. I mean, yes, there's a gray area, but people put themselves in the same situation. It is a principal thing if you ask yourself what you do if you're in that situation, an animal. It's a principal thing if you say that once something has sentience, has awareness, you will not initiate violence on it. It's not to say that, yes, through the course of your actions, you're not going to be contributing to their suffering. But it is a principled argument to say that I, as a human being, will not actively initiate violence directly on a human being or a non-human animal. That is a principled outlook. Period. That's all this thing is if you take it to its logical conclusion. As opposed to trying to draw these lines and say, well, look, I respect humans, but I don't respect this kind of animal. The line is sentience. The line is awareness of your own awareness. Any sentient being that has the capacity to be aware of itself is something that is worthy of life. Any being that runs away from pain and suffering, that is something that is worthy of life. That's something, in my opinion, that is worthy of me respecting its right to want to live. And that's all this thing fundamentally comes down to.
I think they all have the same value. No, you don't. I think they all own themselves just as much as I do. No, you freaking don't. All of those are an outright lie. Stop lying.
Stop pretending you know what people think. I absolutely believe that 100% these sentient beings own themselves just as much as I do. Period. That is a definitive, unequivocal statement. If you want to make arguments as to why you don't believe that's true, fair enough. But definitively, without a shadow of a doubt, if you're saying that people know that they are lying, this is the realm of philosophy that people go into. It's pseudo-philosophy because you cannot, one, you're wrong definitively in regards to me, and you're making a judgment on what people actually think, which is a horrible place to go at. You don't know what people think. All you do is you can strive to understand what is going on, what people actually say, the logical consistency of their arguments.
If you want to convince other people, say what you actually mean. Admit there are gray areas, admit that we're drawing lines in different places, and try to talk people into changing where they draw the line and how much suffering they're willing to contribute to.
That's exactly what we're doing. That's exactly what these animal rights activists are doing. These vegans, these vegetarians are doing. Essentially, that is what they're doing.
Or death or whatever else. Then you'll actually have a better chance of persuading people to change their behavior if you're honest about what you believe.
All right. Well, there you have it. That had some salient points, some points I agree with, but one of the biggest problems with that video, obviously, is that Larken is making claims on what people actually think, what people actually believe. And the way in which he defines a lot of things are cherry-picked in my definition. Unfortunately, this is the world that we live in. People have different definitions. People have different definitions of government, of anarchism, of murder. And it's important for us to have an understanding when we're talking about issues. But I think it comes down to people to not only understand what people mean, but to look at themselves and to ask themselves if they consider what they're doing to be in line with their conscience. And this is what this entire thing comes down to. Your conscience. Ask yourself what you would do. That is the golden rule. That's the philosophy that people are trying to promote. You know, whether they're vegans or vegetarians, whether they're libertarians, they're feminists. It's fundamentally a respect for all living beings. And as I keep saying, I don't truly believe in a freedom unless, of course, it's freedom for all. I don't think you can have a freedom movement if you want to start cherry picking. Just like a few hundred years ago, we would have done this and said that we had a freedom movement. However, in the U.S. Constitution, certain people are only considered 3/5 human. You have to extend your compassion towards all things. This is what the concept of agape is about, universal love. This is what Martin Luther King preached. This is what Plato preached. This idea of forming a family unit, a unit of compassion towards your fellow beings, extending that not just to your human friends, your human animals, but to all living beings. And that is fundamentally, in my opinion, that is this concept of voluntarism and of nonviolence. I mean, at the core of it, it is respect for individual rights. It's recognizing the fact that within each and every single one of these beings lies this awareness, lies this consciousness that should be respected. And granted, we all draw this line in different areas. It's this understanding that they are sentient beings, and this fact that they want to live is the thing that compels us to want to respect them. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that's been one of the longest videos I've ever done. Yeah, I hope you enjoy that. Let us know what you think with a thumbs up or a thumbs down with some comments. Peace out. Keep it real. Feel free to share this to Larken. Share this to your fellow carnist friends. And until next time, peace out. Keep it real. This is Chris Schul, the Esoteric Noetic, signing out. Boom shakalaka.